Reasons church do the NCLS. I'm going to give you 3 reasons today. The first reason is to include everyone in a positive process that gives them a voice. Secondly, to help parishes discover strengths and to celebrate and build on those. And thirdly, to discover areas that could do with more attention. So the first area, to include everyone in a positive process that gives them a voice. I think that now more than ever, in this time when people feel particularly disconnected, to give people a voice in this way into their church community life is incredibly valuable. And there may be people who are not connecting a great deal. Some of us have been, gathering again after a very disruptive year last year. Depending on what state you're in, that hasn't fully resumed, and then it can be cut off at a moment's notice, as we're just hearing in Newcastle. So when people, some people have not returned because of health concerns, or we perhaps don't even know why they haven't returned. We haven't connected with them again. And this is one way everyone can. And I want to say that by doing this, it sends respectful, unifying, and commitment-inspiring messages. So when you're saying to people, your voice matters, we want your input, that's a respectful way of inviting people into connecting with church again. It's a unifying comment to say, you're part of this community and we want to hear your voice, we want to know what you think. And it inspires commitment when the leadership here are saying, we want to hear people's input as we think about our church and what our priorities are, how we're going as a church, and where we're going. When churches communicate that to their attenders, it actually inspires commitment, because people feel listened to and they feel more willing to get on board with whatever the church might be proposing down the track. And so I want you to remind parish leaders that doing the NCLS isn't like, an imposition. You shouldn't be apologising, saying, sorry folks, we're going to be doing the survey this week and we hope it's not too much of an imposition. Instead, we'd be saying, focus on what a positive process it is, that this is something we can do together when there's so many things we can't do together. And in fact, you'll be able to include people who aren't even attending if you can email them, if you can get them onto, say, your Facebook page, because we're going to have multiple ways that people can get onto the survey electronically. Indeed, if the entire area goes into lockdown where you are and you're not meeting, that's not going to disrupt the survey greatly, because there's going to be online options where everyone can just do it online. It won't matter how you've ordered it. And so that's the first thing I'd say. It includes everyone. And secondly, we talk a lot about strengths at NCLS, and we truly mean that. Ruth highlighted in her talk just before a number of strengths of the Catholic Church. And yes, there are challenges as well, of course. But it's so easy to be problem focused, isn't it? And the danger is, once you're problem focused, after a while, all you see are problems, and you don't necessarily focus on what God is doing in church and what are the good things that are going on. It's very easy to always notice the things that aren't happening or aren't happening quite as you'd like them to. And so NCLS, we do have a focus on strengths and helping every church to see where their relative strengths are and to build on them. For example, if a church does the survey, it's going to get its results, a church life profile. This is a picture of the 2016 church life profile. In one of the first pages, they're going to see some basics about their church. So here's a church that it can see its pie chart of who its people are who are attending. And you can see that big blue area, 66% of people are long-term attenders at our church. So this is all going to come out of everyone in church doing the survey and telling us about themselves. But look at this figure here, 5% of people in this church are newcomers. And that's actually above the average for this group, for this denomination. And so a strength to celebrate is that the church is attracting newcomers. And by newcomers, we mean people who have been away from church for some years and they've now come back. So not people who have just popped in from another church, or not people who are just visiting, but people who have moved into church life after having not been at church perhaps for some years or perhaps never. And that's a cause for celebration, for the church to be able to say, look, we might be aware of challenges, but look at the fact that we've got people who are still choosing us as a church to come to. And when they decide to give church a go, this is where they've come and they've decided to stay. And so that's an example of a strength. Another example of a strength might be if a church is looking at its results. On the detail page, we have a detail on all those core qualities that Ruth was showing us. And so on belonging, here's a church's look at how people say their sense of belonging has been in church. And here's an example in a church where it's been going up and up over a period of years. Now, I would say that this is because this church has been making a conscious effort to help build community. And so when they do the survey, they can see if that's actually been happening. In this church, it has been. And it's now above average for the denomination. It's gone from below average to above average. So there's two examples of strengths where churches can look at their results and be encouraged. And if they do nothing more, just to celebrate those strengths and be encouraged by that, perhaps affirm some leaders, some people who perhaps are part of the hospitality team in this example, and affirm them and say, thank you for what you do. It's making a great difference. It's made a tremendous difference over the years here. So that's an example of two strengths that you might celebrate. Another reason churches do the NCLS is to discover areas that could do with more attention. And so while there are strengths, there are also areas that might be weaknesses or might just be not as strong as you'd hope them to be, particularly if the church has put priority in a particular area and they're not seeing those kinds of results. And so, for example, the church might really want to focus on mission and vision and having a sense of clear priorities. And they might see that there's still more communicating to do, that the leadership might know what those priorities are, but the parishioners and the church attenders are not necessarily picking that up yet. And so the results here will show you that. I'm going to show you an example here. The church gets its results. In one of the earlier pages, it looks at the people in this church and a focus on children and youth. And so in this example, here's a church that is retaining less of its youth than it was 5 years earlier. So in 2011, 2/3 of the kids who live at home, who are 15 and over, are still coming along to church with their parents, which is great. That is a really good figure. This is a church that, probably has youth programs and has real energy going into that. And 5 years later, it's gone down to about half of the kids. Now, in a big church, that might not be immediately noticeable. And so this is the opportunity with a survey like this, where you might see that there is a trend going on, that there is a change happening that you weren't aware of until you saw the results. And in a very concrete thing like children and youth, that can be true, but even more so in some of the other areas that the church survey addresses, such as sense of belonging, or whether people see a clear vision, or things of that nature. So I wanted to leave you with those thoughts to begin with, and I'm just going to the last slide. Those three areas that that I think are compelling to talk to parishes about why to do the NCLS. Let's include everybody in what's going on here. Let's help discover some strengths and celebrate them, or let's discover areas that could do with more attention. And of course, you as a diocesan person, as a denominational person, you might be inviting to journey with them as you look at that as well. Some final thoughts to share, and then we're going to move on to something else. I've said that now more than ever we need to hear their voices. That would still be my main point that I would say that should be motivating churches. A couple of other things to mention to you about the survey that I'll just pop in here. There are going to be sample churches. There are going to be parishes, and there are going to be churches that are invited to take part in the NCLS, even if they weren't necessarily thinking about it, but because of this donation that we have received, out of a concern that we continue to have representative figures for the Australian Church, we are going to take the initiative and contact denominational people with a sample of churches and say, we'd like to invite these churches to take part at no cost. And so, assuming they go ahead, they will take the survey, they will receive the results. There'll be no cost to them or to the denomination because of that incredible donation. Another thing that I wanted to mention is that there's going to be a leader survey, and we intend to send that out to every church in Australia, regardless of whether they're signing up for the NCLS. So we're doing this differently this time. We want to make this the biggest leader survey that's ever run in Australia with the most participants. And so that will be happening, and we intend to be sending that out to parishes so that the priests and leaders, other kinds of leaders, deacons, etc., elders, all kinds of people who are involved in significant leadership can take the time to do that in their own time. And there will be reports available for you to purchase for your diocese or denominational group if you so wish. So that will be something that you can follow us up about. First, we want to get the data. We want to get this leader survey with many participants so that you have good data if you want those reports. And on a similar note, we're going to also be sending out a national church census to every church around Australia. That's a one per church survey that asks them about their programs, asks them about their activities, their connection with the community, etc. It'll be filled out by a leader or an administrator who knows the answer to those kinds of questions. And it's as with the leader survey, there will be reports possible if you're interested in following us up about that.